Hold it right there and stop whatever you're doing, and let me tell you about a cool little indie game that's out right now called SUPERHOT, Mind Control Delete. Follow up to the original SUPERHOT, a game released back in 2016, and also SUPERHOT VR, a virtual reality spin-off that's hands down one of the best reasons to go out there and pick up a VR headset, along with VR Kanojo.
It's like one of my Japanese animes.
Anyway, developed by the aptly named SUPERHOT team, this thing has the distinction of being one of the most unique shooters ever made, based around such a simple premise, that being time only moves when you do. The more you move around, the more time resumes back to its normal pace, but the faster the game is moving, the more difficult it becomes to avoid bullets and incoming attacks. If you watch footage of someone playing this, it almost kind of looks like they're pressing the pause button all the time, but it's really the best way to play the game, stopping to scan your surroundings to see where enemies are coming from and taking them out preemptively before they've even had a chance to fire off a single shot. It's definitely one of the coolest looking shooters to come out this year, and right before we start to get bombarded with all these super violent murder death kill shooters, it might be nice to take a step back and play something a little bit simpler like this. And if this video doesn't have you chanting SUPERHOT over and over by the end of it, well, then I've not done my job right.
SUPERHOT.
Running on the Unity engine, Mind Control Delete has the wonderful distinction of both running well and also not looking like complete shit. It's got a really vivid art style too, with the backgrounds being clean and white, enemies being a bright red, and the player's hands and weapons being black. There's some trippy visual effects the game uses throughout certain areas, and the constant flashing of text prompts on the screen really helps to sell that whole Lawnmower Man aspect of the story, where you're playing some poor nameless person stuck inside this virtual limbo. Particle effects look awesome, there's some cool physics, and about the only thing that it's missing is a proper soundtrack. Gotta say that I feel like they're really missing out here on not having any music. I mean, anything would have been good. All you get is some kind of generic dance track on the disco level. So if you are going to play this thing, which I do recommend, maybe turn on some Carpenter Brute or some Power Glove and you're good to go.
SUPERHOT.
SUPERHOT doesn't really have any kind of proper story, and what it does tell the player is done ambiguously through these weird computer messages, with blocks of text redacted and all kinda glitched out. It's got something to do with humanity being enslaved inside this VR system and forced to play through all of these scenarios. People communicate through confusing and garbled text messages, dealing with themes of transhumanism, most of which I'm not intelligent enough to kind of understand or analyze. Honestly, it's the kind of thing that skates a thin line between being really mysterious and interesting and just coming across as pretentious. Basically, you're stuck interacting with an antiquated MS-DOS kind of command prompt, navigating through folders to access all of the levels the game has to offer. And when I say all the levels, we'll get to that soon enough. I will say too that the first 20 or so minutes of this thing is a thinly veiled tutorial / prologue, which isn't really all that good. But look, just stick with it until after that and it becomes a lot more fun to play. Summing up the gameplay is pretty simple. You start each level unarmed and then have to quickly use whatever's at your fingertips to survive. You've got your fists, which can be used to punch enemies if they're close enough, as well as a whole heap of throwable objects scattered around the levels. From things like ninja stars, beer bottles or pipes, through to something a bit more creative like books, pens or darts. Along with a crowbar, which I'm sure is a reference to a certain theoretical physicist. In the gym level, you can even pick up a tub of protein powder and throw it at someone. Once you kill enough bad guys on the level, then you go into the next one, with the added benefit of being able to watch back what you just did in real time, which kinda makes you look like a stone cold badass. The idea though is to get your hands on a weapon as soon as possible, and though there's only really 4 in the game, they're all pretty different from one another. Funnily enough, the pistol is the most basic, but also I thought the most useful, simply because it's accurate and quick to fire. Double-barreled shotgun's another option, though it's less accurate at range, and it's also obviously only got 2 shots before you're done. There's what's basically an assault rifle which fires in 4-round bursts, and the last one they've added in, which I guess is supposed to be like a railgun or something, though it's called the fish gun in the game. It's a super accurate weapon with no bullet spread, and it goes exactly where your crosshair is. I do kind of wish they'd included the SMG from the VR version and also allowed for dual welding, but this is a pretty solid lineup of useful, effective weapons, so it is kind of hard to fault it. The catch to this is that the enemies all use the same weapons, and if any of them are lying around, they'll go and pick that weapon up and then promptly try to shoot you in the face. Here's the cool part though, if you throw something at an enemy when they're holding a weapon, that weapon has the tendency to launch out of their hands into your general direction, making it easy to pick out of the air and keep firing. Once a weapon is out of ammo, you can even throw that weapon itself at another armed enemy, chaining shots together seamlessly. I mean, at least that's the idea anyway. Throwing a weapon at someone is also quicker than waiting for it to reload, so sometimes you can just be throwing guns constantly, just fuck! Throwing a weapon at someone is quicker than waiting for it to reload, so sometimes you can just be discarding guns over and over. It all combines though into this really seamless battle of bullets as you're throwing bottles at bad guys, catching shotguns in midair and darting all over the room to avoid being shot. It's a simple concept and one that's easy to pick up and play, but that still has a really high skill ceiling. You almost need to start to predict where enemies are going to be ahead of time to compensate for the bullet's travel time. Can be confusing at first, but when it all comes together, it's like peanut butter and jelly. It's a thing of beauty. I always thought that the SUPERHOT games were basically how John Wick saw the world, and I mean, if anything, this is about the best representation of that guy's shooting skills we'll ever see in a video game. If you think about it, you're basically just playing a character with super heightened reflexes. His physical capabilities are still mostly human, in that he can't move at super speed or any of that kind of crap. You're just viewing it all through the eyes of someone who has a high reaction time and can assess all possible threats at once, kinda like old mate John Wick. Now, if you played the first game or even SUPERHOT VR, you'd know that it was about getting through a bunch of increasingly challenging levels, playing them over and over until you get the hang of it, and really just dealing with some pretty rough trial and error. Mind-Controlled Delete has a different premise though. Instead of it just being one level after the other, which you've got to go through, it's instead got a bunch of nodes you need to get through, with each node having anywhere from 3 or 4 to upwards of half a dozen individual stages. After finishing a couple of stages, you then get to choose from one of 2 randomly picked hacks to give you a boost along the way, and you're always unlocking these as you progress through the campaign. This could be something like refilling your health points, making it so you can move or shoot weapons faster, or even something as awesome as making objects explode when you throw them at someone. And probably the most useful one is one of the last ones you get, where every enemy you kill refills a health point. Yeah, that one's kind of broken. You are at the mercy of the RNG gods with this thing though, and it can really make or break your chances sometimes. Either way though, expect to die a whole lot here. Like the other couple of games, there is still a lot of trial and error when it comes to getting through this. Thankfully though, the shooting is mostly pretty fun and engaging. Mostly. At the start of each node, you're able to choose from a core to play with, which is kind of like a starting effect. The most basic one is endurance, being able to survive 2 shots. I mean, without it, you can only survive 1. But the other ones are even better. There's charge, where you can teleport right up into an enemy's grill, leaving them wide open for an easy kill. That rhymes. Combine this with one of the hacks where each enemy killed instantly resets the cooldown, grab a katana, and then you're suddenly zipping all over the place like an edgy ninja. Returning from the first game is Hot Switch, where you take over that person's body, causing them to glitch out and die in the process. It's not all that useful at first because it also breaks the weapon they're holding, but you can use hacks again to make this so it doesn't destroy an enemy's weapon, and again, even chain together multiple switches one after the other. The other one is Recall. Now, this is where you start each level with a katana, and the recall part means you can have the katana snap back into your hands like Thor's hammer from anywhere on the level. If it hits some poor asshole along the way, well, even better. And this is the shit right here. The katana is easily one of the best parts of the game. You can deflect bullets right back at the person shooting it, and it also has the benefit of cutting enemies in half when they're sliced with it. It's just like one of my Japanese animes.
It's like one of my Japanese animes.
Now, all of the enemies still die in a single hit, but they have tried to make some of the enemies tougher than others. Like for instance, enemies armed with melee weapons can often deflect your bullets. There's enemies that explode when killed, and you'll also start to see environments with traps that are going to explode if you get too close. Mind Control Delete does get trickier as you go along, but I honestly found the difficulty here to be really inconsistent. Some of the levels seem to be incredibly challenging and require lots of replaying, and I've even been stuck on some of them for like 15 or 20 minutes. But then others you're going to breeze right through first go without any dramas. I do have to say too that I find it odd that there's no crouch button. I mean, seriously? A big part of the VR version of SUPERHOT was physically crouching to use in-game props as cover during gunfights, and it's just kind of weird to not include it this time. The biggest issue with this thing though is the RNG element. Every single time you replay a node, you spawn in a different location, and enemies also spawn from different spots, so you never really know when or where they're going to come from. There's certain levels that are just so much easier than the others too. Some of these have like side rooms you can hide in and bottleneck the enemies to come towards you, whereas others are way more exposed and make it a lot harder to see where bullets are coming from. This is always the kind of issue you get in these kind of games where the procedurally generating algorithm can either extend you an olive branch or instead piss in your mouth. You'll notice this the most in the game's endless mode where you just hold out against never-ending waves of enemies. I mean, once you find a good spot to kind of like set up your defenses, you almost have to want to get killed at this point to end the round. After playing endless mode for a bit, there's just so many weapons lying around on the ground that it also starts to affect performance, to the point that it becomes super choppy and almost unplayable. I also noticed that the hit detection can also be a little bit inconsistent, like I've lost count of the amount of times I've died from being shot through a wall. Again, not really the kind of thing you want to see in a high lethality shooter like this. Yeah, trying to hit those enemies with those limited weak spots is often impossible at close range, because you end up hitting one of their other limbs instead. How about this though, there's not even any kind of pause button. Press the escape button and it just takes you back to the main menu. Yeah, I found that out the hard way. The way the game tries to lengthen itself is also kind of piss weak. So you've got to finish all of these nodes, right? And these are broken down into like maybe 4 or 5 levels. But later in the game, this starts to be 7 or 8 and you've got to beat each of these without dying. If you die on level 7 or 8, it's right back to level 1. That'd be like running in a race, and right before you're near the finish, you trip over your own shoelaces. So they make you get up and go back to the start line. You can't just get up and keep running. Nah son, you're back to the beginning. It's just a pretty blatant padding technique, which isn't all that necessary because of the high amount of replayability the game offers up anyway. Like this bit here too, where it just keeps glitching me out and putting me back at the start of the level because of its odd way of trying to develop the plot. It doesn't add anything to the scene itself outside of just pissing me off. Won't take long to realize that you're just moving through a lot of the same areas too. The same lab, the same casino, bar, disco, dojo, furry convention, one after the other. You get a pretty big sense of deja vu. It's just that each time you head back to one of these areas, the enemy variety is going to be different, but I don't know if that really counts as extra content. That'd be like finishing knee deep in the dead, then it sends you back to the hangar, but now you're coming up against Hell Knights and Pinky Demons from the get-go. Mind Control Delete is definitely better than the base game, though it still doesn't really hold a candle to the VR version. Overall though, it still just kind of feels like a more polished proof of concept. If they're ever really going to take this thing to the next level, they're going to have to really crack down on the hit detection and create some actual new content. Still, despite all the issues I had with this thing, it's really hard to not recommend it. And they're practically giving this thing away anyway. Yeah, if you own the original game on Steam, you can download this one for free. I just hope with the inevitable SUPERHOT 2, they can finally hit that red, white and black nail firmly on the head. Super hot. Super hot.
Super hot. Super